busy day in the sports world, particularly around the Broncos and what they are doing down at the Senior Bowl. Our own Andrew Mason has broken in the last couple of hours that the Broncos have had, quote, a couple of interviews with one quarterback, and it's not who you might think, Marcello. This is Tulane's Michael Pratt talking down at the Senior Bowl. He's already met with the Broncos twice. What do you read into this? And we can't ignore, where's Tulane? Down in Nala. Sean Payton, a lot of connections down there, loves the LSU guys, to some extent the Tulane Green Wave. They had a good year this year, largely ranked in the top 25. Michael Pratt, a big part of that, but we've got a name. It kind of feels fun to have a name.
Yeah, I mean, it's something else. Listen, I guess I have an admission to make.
Okay.
All right? I've been going through the 5 stages of grief with this team, Will.
What stage are you on now?
Well, what are they, right? It's denial, anger, what is it, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I think I'm getting into the acceptance stage of what this team is and the reality of what it's going to be going forward. And it's not the anger was definitely, hey man, that's how many years in a row without us sniffing the playoffs, although this year they were close for a short amount of time. But I'm there now. So now I'm just intrigued to hear the names. Is it the name I was hoping to hear Wednesday? What, they got there on Monday, right? Sunday evening? Monday was the start of practice, and they've already met with this guy twice, so there has to be some interest. And in Mason's piece that you referenced, there's another tie there, right? I think the O-line coach was with the Saints up until a year ago, and he spent a year with Michael Pratt this year at Tulane.
It does feel like there's a little bit of smoke here around Michael Pratt. He's currently projected as a third-round pick, sort of by most mock drafts. So we're not talking about a guy you would take at 12. He's not in the conversation there in the first round. Michael Pratt last year at Tulane, Cello, threw for 22 touchdowns, 5 picks. So it's a guy that, okay, he didn't come out with those Star Wars numbers. We're not sitting here going, hey, he threw 47 touchdowns and people were clamoring for him to be in New York in the Heisman conversation. But it's a guy who was there for 4 years, played in the COVID year in 2020. His freshman year, he threw 20 touchdowns. His sophomore year, he threw 21 touchdowns. His junior year, he threw 27 touchdowns. His senior year, he threw 22 touchdowns. 90 career touchdown passes, no more than 8 picks in any season. The last one came in his sophomore year. He only threw 5 interceptions as a junior and a senior. My point being that he's done it for a while, and he's done it consistently for a while. And people may scoff at the Tulane thing. I get it. But remember, this was a top 25 team for most of the year. So just because you didn't see Tulane playing Alabama doesn't mean they didn't play some good competition and have some good results. And if you can get him in the third, okay, that would not be my preference. I've been clear on that. I want to go first-round guy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've done a good job of convincing me there are so many other holes on this roster that if you get Brock Bowers at 12, stud tight end out of Georgia, and then we're talking about Michael Pratt in the third, maybe I can be a little more excited. Maybe I've gotten tunnel vision that it has to be a first-round QB. Mace breaking this news today reminds me there are other good quarterbacks in this draft that won't go in the first round.
Exactly, and I think Mace did a phenomenal job of detailing why there would be interest. The strengths of Michael Pratt's game are timing, execution, consistency, and that's what Sean Payton's offense is, right? That's all we've heard about. And that's why we had a disconnect with Russell Wilson, who a lot of times his success is playing off script. So you can see why there might be interest. Now, to have that known already on Wednesday of the week of Senior Bowl that you've already met with the guy twice, that's a little bit more than just a slight amount of interest. Am I right? I mean, if in 2 days you want to sit down with you've made time to sit down with this guy twice just to kind of get – and he said he broke down his background of – his support system and whatnot, and I'm assuming the second meeting probably dealt a little bit more with football, but there's extreme interest if you're meeting with him twice in 3 days.
Yeah, and Pratt told Mace of being, potentially considered, quote, I think that would be awesome. So it's, he wants an NFL gig, but this isn't a kid who took the podium today and told him, oh, I've met with 20 different teams and I'm keeping my options open and I'll be lucky to go wherever I go. No, he confirmed to Mace 2 meetings with the Broncos and, quote, I think it would be awesome. So it sounds like, first of all, there's mutual interest. And if you're Michael Pratt, what better place to land than where you could potentially start day one as a third-round QB? Not many third-round QBs get gigs ever, let alone potentially in day one. But if they went into camp with this kid and Stidham, and he flashed it all, we saw Stidham last year in the final 2 games of the season, he may have a chance. So it's, again, I'm not sitting here on January 31st telling Broncos fans, hey, here's your next QB, Michael Pratt. But these are pretty, like you said, pretty solid clues that there is legitimate interest. And let's say their plan is Bo Nix. And we'll get more into Bo Nix because Cecil had a really good report on Bo Nix not having a good day today. But let's say their plan is Bo Nix. And for whatever reason, Bo Nix goes 11. And they're sitting there going, shoot, Bo Nix went 11. Okay, we'll go BPA, best player available at 12, and we'll make sure we get Pratt in round 3. I guess it just feels like keeping the options open for Sean Payton and to a much lesser extent, George Payton.
And when was our new guy with the scouting department hired? Was that on Monday?
That was on Monday. They brought in a Saints scout on Monday, a Saint coach on Tuesday, and on Wednesday they're falling in love with a Tulane quarterback.
So does this have Mr. Rager's fingerprints on it? This is a guy that he may have targeted being in New Orleans all year. And
Rager?
Isn't that his last name?
I thought it was Rager.
Oh, whatever. I'll call him Rager.
I know Rager makes it sound like he has a problem.
No, he's at a Rager.
Is Rager like he likes to party? Oh, okay.
See what I'm saying?
Oh, my bad, Cello. KJ tells me it's Rager.
Does this guy know how to have a good time or what?
Well, I assumed it was Rager. No one likes to be known as the Rager.
Oh,
you know?
Yeah, they do. In your high school and college years, your formidable years, of course you do.
Yeah, I'm going to go finish off my...
No, that guy knows how to have a good time.
12th Keystone Light, become the Rager. All right, my bad. You were right. I was wrong. Rager, please go on.
There you go. I'm just wondering, is this a guy that maybe he targeted while he was, doing a similar type job down in New Orleans?
Potentially.
I mean, he's right there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what we've heard for years is that, hey, Josh Allen was how many miles up the road, and the Broncos didn't take an interest to him. And there's a guy who's been playing at Tulane. Now, obviously, not the same skill set, and definitely not the same potential. I don't know that this – listen, we can kind of – I could hear you say, hey, man, he's got an opportunity to start. If he goes in the 3rd round, you're going to have a quarterback battle, and it's going to be between Stidham and this guy, if he is the one who's selected. And we never know how kids are going to approach that change from college to the NFL. There's very few that excel immediately.
So there you have it. The Broncos have had a, quote, couple of interviews with Tulane quarterback Michael Pratt. You can read about it at denversports.com. Let's talk about other guys at the Senior Bowl today. Was chatting with Cecil and Mace. They were not impressed at all with either Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. today. Said Bo Nix had a really bad day, took too much time in the pocket. Basically, he's trying to find these small windows that he doesn't have the arm strength to complete them into. Okay, we weren't there. We're just passing along secondhand information. But we've seen in the past the Senior Bowl can elevate guys. Like Baker Mayfield went all the way to 1. Josh Allen was at 5 after having a good Senior Bowl. What does it tell you that Cecil, who's been in the scouting community for 20-plus years, can go down there and say, ugh, I'm not so into Bo Nix anymore? Does it worry you that, hey, if you're there at 12 and he's still there, it may now be a reach? Or is this kind of the glorified underwear Olympics that the Combine are, but to obviously a more extent? But let's remember, this is still an all-star game. What I'm asking you, Cello, how much stock are you taking into Bo Nix and Michael Penix Jr. not impressing at the Senior Bowl?
I think that it's within the eyes of the beholder, right? I mean, if you love a guy, you're going to make an excuse. You're going to make allowances for him and his performance at a Senior Bowl like this. If you don't, then you're obviously going to just be like, hey, we'll put him down on the board now. I don't know. I mean, it's still early in the week. We've heard reports in years gone by, Will, of people struggling early in the week, and by the end of the week, something just clicks, and by the time they get to the game, you see a completely different player than you saw maybe Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of that week. So I don't know that I put a ton of stock in it unless you're just completely dominant.
Yeah, and I get that maybe it's more of a stock up thing than a stock down thing, right?
Yeah.
That you can really help yourself. But listen, Bo Nix played 90-something college games. He's been at Auburn. He's been at Oregon. There is plenty of tape on this guy that, Rager, I'm going to still call him Rager. I'm actually getting some texts right now that lean toward me, Rager. We'll see. But anyways, I don't think scouts are going to go down there and say, oh, you know what? Wednesday, Bo Nix stunk. He's off our board. That's not really how this works. But at the same time, I do think it's a little red flag that Bo Nix has so much experience. And he's going out there against kids that are 2-3 years younger than him in some cases, and he can't dominate them. That's what you'd like to see. Remember, Bo Nix and Justin Fields are pretty much the same age. And Justin Fields has been in the league for 3 years. I would prefer them saying, oh, this looks like men against boys, because Bo Nix is so experienced that he's taking it to everyone down here in Mobile, and that's not what we're getting.
Well, a lot of things, you got to take it with a grain of salt, too, because, yes, you're playing with other elite athletes, but you're not playing with the best in college football at that level. I mean, there's people that turn down opportunities to go to the Senior Bowl, and you have to give it a little time as far as chemistry is concerned, especially for a short week like this. You show up, you meet somebody, you go out and practice 4 times, and then you're expected to go out and excel in a football game. Sometimes it happens, and like I said, sometimes it grows to that during the week, and sometimes it just doesn't. And I think that's what's what I meant by allowances and excuses, is that people that like a player, they'll be like, hey, man, he was playing with guys he doesn't know. He's playing with in an offensive system maybe that he's not familiar with. That's why pro days matter so much, because they get to have their own guys. They run the stuff that they want to run. They have a plan. And it's not like we haven't seen that in the past either, Will, that somebody struggled, say, at one of these audition bowls, so to speak, and then at their pro day they kind of shine a little bit.
All right, well, let's go over to Penix then, because people were so high on him after the performance against Texas in the semifinals, and then the bright lights come on against Michigan, arguably the best defense he's played all year, and he did not look good at all in the national title game.
Right.
I think he got dinged up early in that game, but that kind of goes into the injury concerns too, which we've heard a lot of these draft experts say that medicals will be really important for Penix. But at the same time, man, I want buzz about Penix, and we're getting none of that through 2-3 days at the Senior Bowl. That worries me too, to the point where I'm not saying I'm out on Nix and Penix necessarily, but Cello, I might be out on them at 12. At this point, I'm leaning toward being out on both of them at 12.
Listen, I might be getting through the 5 stages of grief, but
you are.
Listen, I'm not going to disagree with. Remember, it was probably a couple weeks ago, Will, you said they got to go up and get one of those top 3. That'd be all I'm really interested in as far as first round. I'd be much more. I guess it would be easier to swallow if they had a plan like you said. Say you get Brock Bowers at 12, and then you address quarterback maybe later down the road. If you're not going to get one of the top 3, to me, I think you might be a wasted year, and you got to start looking at the other veterans that may be available.
Okay, and I talked about this with Jake Shapiro today on Orange and Blue Today. You can find that on Denver Sports, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. We were filling in for Cecil and Mace, and he said the same thing. He's like, well, if you just can't get the QB, you just punt a year. And then you look at the 2025 QBs, the Shadur Sanders of the world. And while I get your guys' logic on the surface, Cello, we're not talking about that Peyton Manning retired last year or 2 years ago. We're talking about 8 years ago. At what point do you have to take a round 1 QB to help please an apathetic fan base that is frustrated, sort of at their wits' end without another playoff experience? You're talking about your stages of grief. Heck, you're at acceptance. Do you really want dozens and dozens of fans on the hill at training camp? Or is it critical for interest in this team and interest in this brand in a city that has 2 championship contenders in the Avalanche and Nuggets to say, we're the Denver Broncos, and we're going to go take a quarterback because it's about darn time we fix the most important position in sports?
That's why I think it's got to be we hear it year in and year out around the NFL draft, right? We hear this was our guy all along. If the Broncos are able to frame whoever they go, say they take a quarterback at 12, but they frame it as this was the guy that we've wanted all along. It's a young dude, and even maybe I think Penix might draw more interest than Bo Nix would just because of the type of players they are. But you'd have to frame it that way. My issue with Penix it's not even so much the injury thing, because I think that can happen to anyone, and he had a rough go of it, and is he injury prone? Maybe. And I think NFL scouts and these executives are going to take that big time into account before making that selection.
Oh, they're going to have the doctors poke and prod him and look at those ACLs and look at that shoulder. They got to make sure this guy's right before they invest in him.
Bigger problem for me is, say he stays healthy. I had more of a problem with when he was pressured it looked like he lost his composure.
Against Michigan.
Yes.
Yeah.
And man, that might have been the only time he saw it all year, but it was glaring that night, and he just started chucking the rock left and right at that point. He felt pressure, started to see ghosts, and that was only playing against that type of a defense for one game.
And as many have pointed out, Washington has a phenomenal wide receiver room. Couple of top-tier picks in there. And he had a lot of good targets to throw to. He's obviously going to have better receivers with the Broncos than he did with the Huskies. But at a certain point, he had a ton of riches around him up there in Washington. And you just worry with a guy like Penix. I don't want to take too much stock into one game. I don't want to be that guy. But at the same time, it was the biggest game in all of college football, and he just wilted under the pressure. He did.
Yeah.
And he may have been dinged up, and I get it. But at the same time, you know who plays in the AFC West? Max Crosby, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa. Chris Jones. He's going to get hit every single game as the starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos, and all those defenses are going to be better than the Michigan defense, obviously. And so it just worries me with Penix and Nix, again, they're not lighting up the Senior Bowl. I'd rather you and I were sitting here tonight going, oh my gosh, Cecil and Mace are falling all over themselves about how good these two are. And instead we're going, this looks like another draft where there's kind of 3 QBs and then everyone else. And we're only talking ourselves into these second-tier guys at 12 because we're so quarterback desperate.
Yeah, and I found it kind of interesting this morning when Schlereth and Evans had Joel Klatt on, and he kind of broke down the quarterbacks. Caleb Williams is Caleb Williams, right? He's going to be your 1A. But second on his list was Drake May. I mean, he even had things that you could be concerned about with Jaden Daniels. Drake May said once you watch it, I mean, he didn't do a ton of those games because of the conference that they're affiliated with, but when he said he watched the tape, it was Caleb Williams and then Drake May. Is what it gets you intrigued, but would there be a possible deal that could be made? I just don't see it happening. So it's now you're having to build it a different way. You're going to have to get creative with not only how you manipulate the draft and what players you select, but what your plan is going to be at the quarterback position, which is why news like this afternoon with his Michael Pratt from Tulane is starting to make a little bit more sense because they're being able to pick the guy that fits the attributes that they're looking for, and they could build him up, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. We will keep you posted. Mason Cecil will keep you posted at denversports.com. All right, I want to pivot to this idea that I had today, and I wrote a column about it. I'm getting a lot of feedback on it. And I will say it's overwhelmingly positive, which is not usually the case for my column. So I will take it in this rare instance, but I want your reaction to it. And I will lay out my case, of course. But I think, Cello, that the Broncos should aggressively pursue Taysom Hill this offseason, the soon-to-be 34-year-old do-it-all utility man from the Saints. You've watched him play quarterback. You've watched him play running back. You've watched him play receiver and, of course, tight end. They bring in Pete Carmichael, the offensive coordinator for basically 15 years in New Orleans. Could this be a recruiting pitch to Hill? Potentially. You've got coaches here who believe in him, clearly, gave him a real chance in the NFL. Again, I'll get more into my case as to why, but you watch the NFL. You watch Red Zone. You see Taysom Hill score all these touchdowns all the time.
Yeah.
What's your general reaction to, hey, maybe the Broncos don't have a ton of money because of this Russ situation, but if you can only spend in 1, 2, or 3 places, Taysom Hill's a guy you should invest in?
I would agree with you. I read your piece as well. I think you did a great job kind of outlining what it would be for the Broncos. He may roll in here and being modern-day Slash, and he would be your best tight end right now, basically, that they have in that room. If he were to play some, which he's played there, he's played receiver, he's played running back, played quarterback. I don't have a problem with it at all. It just depends on the money that would be associated with it.
Due to make $10 million the next couple of years from New Orleans. That is not guaranteed, by the way. They can get out of that before March 15th for just like $1.5 million. They just fired their whole offensive staff. So if a new staff comes in and wants to go in a new direction, it's easy to say, hey, that 33, soon-to-be 34-year-old's not part of our plans. I would argue there's not a lot of tread on those tires because he hasn't been an every-down player. His body may be more like a 26-year-old in terms of NFL years than the average 33-year-old in the league. So I'm glad you like the idea, and I think the premise is it's pretty simple. The Broncos can't score touchdowns in the red zone. You know who scores touchdowns in the red zone? Taysom Hill.
Yeah.
He can catch them, he can run for them, and heck, he can throw them. He can do all 3 of them. It just feels like this year, how many times were they on the 6-yard line and things just stalled out. And I know that was Russ, and it's going to be a new QB next year, almost certainly. But how nice would it be to have that weapon, especially a weapon, Cello, that defenses can't really prepare for? Because when you send Hill on the field, you don't really know what he's going to be asked to do.
You're thinking gimmick automatically. What kind of player are they going to draw up for him to be the guy who scores that touchdown? I guess after hearing you say all that, he has a team right now. He has a home. That staff gets together. They're going to look at all the same things that you did. And, hey, this is a weapon for us. And he may not be an every down guy, but he gives us versatility at the position, at numerous positions. Why would we want to see him go? Unless the money for them is just too steep.
Yeah, they could get $10 million off the books, and it's the same reason we're having the conversations about Garett Bolles. I think in a perfect world, Garett Bolles is the Denver Broncos left tackle next year. But when you look at they can save $14 million against the cap, might make sense to move on. I think New Orleans is having those same conversations, and frankly, they're probably trying to clean themselves a little bit from the Payton Carmichael era. Not that it was a bad era, but just new staff, new energy. Yeah. He's one of the only holdovers. When you think Taysom Hill, you think of the guy that Sean Payton had the guts to take the ball out of Drew Brees' hands and put it in this guy's hands, and it worked 99% of the time. Yeah. If you're some hot, young, new 29-year-old OC going into New Orleans, you're probably thinking, we're ready for a new era. And let's be honest here, not that Taysom Hill has a ton of say, but he might be ready for a change of scenery too, and reuniting with coaches he trusts. That's something we see in the NFL time and time and time again.
I think if he is released, this would be probably the first spot he would look and see if there's interest. And I think likewise for the Broncos, I just look at it like, hey, what is the New Orleans Saints plan next year? And while we may not believe that they're contenders, they play in a division that basically you have a new winner every year, and you only have to win 8 or 9 games to do so. They brought in Derek Carr. They still have Kamara. They still have weapons. Why get rid of this guy? And ultimately, I think it's going to come down to the money. But if he were to be released, I'm not saying that there's a trade that's going to happen, but if he were to be released, he'd be a perfect fit here.
And I want to give credit where credit is due. Our 104.3 The Fan and 9 News Broncos insider Mike Kliss laid this out 13 days ago. And in that article, this was before Carmichael was even on the Broncos' radar, he laid out a path for Carmichael and Hill to be a package duo to come to Denver. I worked with Mike for several years. I know Mike pretty darn well. Mike doesn't write stuff or say stuff just to write it or say it. Mike's got a little birdie probably chirping him on this. And I'm not saying he's reporting it by any sense, but Mike's a great seasoned NFL veteran reporter. When you read stuff from those guys, there's rumblings, there's whisperings. So let's just keep that in the back of our mind too. Mike's not just throwing stuff against the wall and seeing what sticks. He already nailed Carmichael. Could he nail Taysom Hill? Well, we'll have to see if he gets released between now and March 15th.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with anything. I mean, like that you just said, I think you nailed it right there. There's got to be some rumblings. There's got to be an opportunity for him to go out and write that. And if it were to come to fruition, I think that only adds to the Broncos what they need, what they're looking for. Hell, Will, he could be a backup quarterback for a short amount of time if need be.
Yeah.
He knows the expectations of Sean Payton, what he's looking for. He's familiar with the offense, all that different stuff. So I think if it works out that way, I wouldn't be disappointed to see that move. Now, when you first brought it up to me last night, I was like, I think you're pretty compelling in your piece.
Wow, look at that. I actually did something right. I appreciate it. Hill last year, more than 400 yards on the ground, average 5 yards a carry. I got a lot of, it's glorified Tebow. Come on. Tebow had a magical year in Denver. Taysom Hill's had a better career than Tim Tebow. Let's not put those two in the same sentence quite yet. Maybe Tebow could have been Taysom Hill, but he didn't want to be Taysom Hill.
He had every opportunity to take on a role like that.
He wanted to be a quarterback, and at the end of the day, it didn't work out.